New understanding of service contract in service-oriented ecosystem. What you will learn in this course. What the difference is between service-oriented ecosystem and SOA. How a service is defined in SO ecosystem. What constitutes relationships between consumer and service? The definition of the service contract and its difference from the web services WSDL. How a service contract may be used. What the difference is between service-oriented ecosystem and SOA. Starting with the version 1, draft 2 of the Reference Architecture Foundation for SOA, OASIS Committee Specification, known as SOA RAF, a new term, Service-Oriented Ecosystem, was created. This creation is aimed at two major goals. Extend an applicability of the concept of service orientation and supersede the term SOA that has gained a reputation of ambiguity due to misuse in technology. OASIS SOA RAF describes service-oriented ecosystem or SO ecosystem as a bridge between business and IT. SO ecosystem sites between business and technology. It is neither wholly IT nor wholly business, but is of both worlds. Neither business nor IT completely own, govern and manage this SO ecosystem. Both sets of concerns must be accommodated for the SO ecosystem to fulfill its purposes. An SO ecosystem is a space in which people, processes and machines act together to deliver business capabilities as services in order to further both their own objectives and the objectives of the larger community. At the same time, OASIS SOA RAF defines SOA as a paradigm for organizing and utilizing distributed capabilities that may be under the control of different ownership domains. It provides a uniform means to offer, discover, interact with and use capabilities to produce desired effects consistent with measurable preconditions and expectations. The central focus of SOA is the task or business function, getting something done. SOA is the architectural type in the SO ecosystem. SO ecosystem forms an environment for the service-oriented behavior for the services and people. All that people do in the enterprise may be explained as servicing each other and servicing external customers. How a service is defined in SO ecosystem. A service in an SO ecosystem realizes particular functionality. A business service implements business functions, while a utility service implements certain technical functionality. I can describe a business service as a collaborative aggregation of actions performed by people and automated means aimed at providing certain business functionality and reaching certain real-world effect, RWE. In technology, a business service is represented by its technical part. Also, there may be pure technical services that denote the capabilities of technology. Examples of technical services are services defined in ITIL version 3, logging and audit services, certain security services and the like. Thus, a service is the mechanism that brings a business and/or technical capability together with the stakeholders' needs in the SO ecosystem. A value of an aggregate service is usually higher than a simple sum of values of participating services. A business value of service may be tangible in a monetary form and intangible in the form of information, knowledge, and reputation. What constitutes relationships between consumer and service? In an SO ecosystem, service consumers enter into relationships with services or service providers long before the consumer invokes the service. This starts with the consumer that has a need in certain business or technical functionality and in the results this functionality can produce. The next mandatory precondition of consumer-service relationships is a consumer's willingness. A consumer may have a need but no intention to satisfy this need, at least at certain times. The need and willingness are usually enough for the consumer to look for a potential service in the market. How this market is organized, i.e. via a service registry repository or in any other way, is irrelevant to this course. According to SOA RAF, any service offered to potential consumers should be represented by a corresponding service description. What service description contains? A service description is a document that explains all aspects of service functionality offered to the consumers, as well as service results and RWE, applied policies, related execution context, where offered service characteristics are guaranteed, means of reachability, i.e. communication channels with the service, and all service interfaces with related SLA and measurement metrics. Description of service interfaces is based on service behavioral model and derived from the service information model. A service description has to contain all information that a potential consumer might require to make a decision whether a particular service is the one that can satisfy consumers' needs. However, the need and willingness on the consumer's side and even on the services side are not enough for the service interaction. For an interaction to happen, both consumer and service should have capabilities to interact. For example, a consumer sends a request to the chosen service, but at the moment when the request appears on the services side, the service is temporarily out of resources necessary for serving new requests. A similar situation is possible on the consumer's side. When a response from the service comes to the consumer, it might be incapable of accepting or processing this response. So the relationships between consumers and services have two components: willingness to interact and capabilities to interact. However, even if the capability is absent in a certain moment, consumer and service should always know each other and agree on the details of possible interaction. Such an agreement is known in an SO ecosystem as a service contract. Definition of the service contract and its difference from the web services WSDL. Several years ago, in technology, where the term SOA originated, the practice of how to do overtook the practice based on what to do. This technology practice is the famous web services technology, later accompanied by REST. IT developers, then architects and managers, started to take web services as an instead of service-oriented architecture. They started to think that an integration between existing applications by using web service was the SOA. Apparently, it was not, and by 2009, such technical SOA dramatically failed and was pronounced dead by the industry-leading experts. By failed, I mean that promises of business values based on service orientation and related architecture were not reached. They could not be reached via an integration technology. However, this technical SOA produced several ambiguous terms, one of which was service contract. In the web service technology, which is a technology of interfaces, WSDL is a language that describes a special interface. Since developers took web services instead of real services, they started to treat interfaces as services and use WSDL as a definition of the service. In OASIS Reference Model for SOA of 2006, this mistake was recognized and corrected, but the development community enjoyed writing simple code that much it ignored the mistake. As a result, WSDL was interpreted as a contract between consumers and virtual services code, and a methodology designed by contract appeared. This methodology, nevertheless, is good and very productive. It is another problem that this methodology has been positioned in the wrong place. That is, it should not be the first requirement for service design. The correct service design starts not with the defining an interface, that is, how the service will communicate with consumers, but with what the service will do, what business functionality this service will be able to provide, and what results it will deliver. The interfaces come later on when the service functionality and service consumer types are defined. Moreover, a service interface is a result of a combination of business functional requirements with the user experience requirements, and not the other way around. Described is a domain service-oriented modeling method, or DOSM, that you can learn in one of my e-courses. In a contrast to WSDL, in SO ecosystem, service contract is a legal, business and technical agreement between a consumer and a service or service provider. The role of the latter may be performed by a service steward or service owner. The service contract, in essence, is an agreed extract or a subset of information provided in the service description. Additionally, service contract allows a consumer to add its policies if needed, and if the service provider does not mind. Therefore, service contract includes, as a minimum, a description of all agreed service interfaces, related SLA, service communication and operation policies, and policies of the execution context. Service interfaces listed in the service contract are the only ones that particular consumer may use to a given service, in spite of other interfaces may be public as well. A violation of the service contract can lead to breaking relationships between consumer and service. As you can see, service contract in an SO ecosystem is much more than a programmatic contract on the service interface, while the latter is included as a part of the mutual agreement. That is, an existing experience collected in the WSDL design and development is utilized, but in much wider business and technical context. The service contract does not necessarily need to contain all information in its text. Some information, for example, policy definitions and WSDL, may be referred. One service may have several contracts with the same consumer, and consumer may have service contracts with several services. A service contract may be formed as a collection of policies. However, there is a significant difference between a service contract and a policy. In general, service policies are public and should be available and accessible to anybody. Service contracts are private matters and have to be protected as confidential documents between the consumer and the service. This rule, however, has a significant exception. How a service contract may be used. SOA RAF defines two types of service contracts, explicit and implicit. An explicit service contract is an agreement based on a negotiation between a consumer and a service. For example, a service description offers three interfaces, A, B, and C, and the use of each of them is associated with a certain fee. A consumer enters into negotiation with the service and they agree that this consumer will use only interface C. This results in some saving for the consumer. In another example, a service offers consumers to choose among several SLA for the same interface. This means that the service requires an explicit contract with every one of its consumers, because the aforementioned interface is the only one offered, but there is not a default SLA bound with it. All explicit contracts are considered confidential. That is, an explicit service contract may not be referred in another service contract, even between the same consumer and service. An implicit service contract is an agreement that assumes that a consumer accepts services constraints as is, and no negotiations are needed. Usually, implicit service contracts appear in the form of public service descriptions, though in some cases an implicit service contract may be published by the service in addition to the service description. As such, implicit service contracts may be referred in other service contracts. An example of an implicit service contract in the form of service description takes place when we shop in a store. When we book something or purchase goods, we a priori agree with the store's rules regarding the merchandise price, returns policy and the like, which constitutes service contract. A service contract defines obligations that the service takes on itself regarding the consumer. No service contract, no obligation, and therefore no service. The concept of service contract in the SO ecosystem is the basis for all service interactions. If an enterprise adopts a service-oriented architecture, service contracts are a must-have precondition for all cases of service use. Even if services are used in the same LOB or business unit, every service provider should know its obligations, and every consumer should know where its rights for the service start and end. A proper management of service contracts is very important for any organization. If in the case of explicit contracts, it is always known who the consumers are and how to manage service visions and the service lifecycle, the cases of implicit contracts are more difficult in management. This is why the best practice of service management recommends a mandatory registration of the service consumers with the service, regardless when and how these consumers use the service. This registration may be articulated as one of the policies for the service interaction, and every consumer who utilizes the implicit service contract becomes automatically agreed with such a registration. What you have learned in this course. A service contract in service-oriented ecosystem is an agreement between each consumer and service. A service contract has a legal, business, and technical aspect. A service contract is a derivative from the service description and incorporates all information about agreed programmatic interfaces of the service, as well as about all applicable policies of service invocation. A service contract defines all obligations, operational and executional, that the service accepts towards its consumer, as well as all limitations which the consumer accepts for its rights and opportunities towards the service. Explicit service contracts are confidential and require certain negotiations between the consumer and the service before the agreement is obtained. Implicit service contracts are based on the consumer's acceptance of the service's public conditions and constraints with no negotiations. The concept of service contract in the SO ecosystem is the basis for all service interactions. A proper management of service contracts is very important. Explicit service contracts are confidential and require certain negotiations between the consumer and the service before the agreement is obtained. Implicit service contracts are based on the consumer's acceptance of the service's public conditions and constraints with no negotiations. A concept of service contract in the SO ecosystem is the basis for all service interactions. A proper management of service contracts is very important for any organization. Thank you. Please allow me to thank you for your time and attention. I hope you have found useful information in the course. If you have any related questions, please post them in the related forum on the same website, and I will do my best to respond as soon as I can. Also, you are very welcome to post your opinion and considerations about the course in the same forum. If you have a consulting proposal with regard to this or another course or the blog post, please use Contact Me instant messaging on the same website to contact me directly. Thank you again and good luck. Yes.